Welcome back to the panel discussion HR Modernization Strategies in Government, sponsored by Workday on Federal News Network. My guests today are Neil Singh, the Acting Executive Director for Human Capital Business Solutions at the Department of Homeland Security. We have Byron Atkins, the Director of the Interior Business Center, Tracy DeMartini, the Chief Human Capital Officer at the General Services Administration, Tanisha Lewis, the HCM Performance and Business Readiness Manager for the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and Wayne Bobby, the Vice President for the U.S. Federal Government at Workday. Now, before we took a break, Tracy talked about just kind of this new world that we're all in and the opportunity that agencies have moving forward now that we have spent the last year or so working remotely, teleworking. And I have to say, from my perspective, really have seen a mindset shift and, agencies are thinking about this differently now. And I think they see telework and remote work as an opportunity to widen the applicant pool, hire anyone from anywhere. And of course, that could, bring in new opportunities to maybe reach people that you weren't reaching before, people who may not have considered the federal government because, they didn't live near a federal hub. So I want to touch on that with each of you. What are you thinking about, this new world that we're entering in here with remote work, telework? How is that going to change the way you hire, who you hire, how? Neil, why don't we start with you?
So DHS is a little unique. So we have what I call the back office staff, which I would fall into the IT, the HR, finance. But we also have a lot of frontline personnel where we don't have those flexibilities, and we need to have people out in the field. They can't telework. So, and that is a large portion of our population of employees. So I'm going to just focus on what's in my little circle of influence, which is the HRIT group that we work on. And I think remote work, and I will say I was one of those that didn't always fully believe in remote work until we fell into this pandemic. I've got to say, I was really impressed at how the technology that our CIO provided with things like Teams and Zoom and how those technologies advanced so quick to allow us to do the work and stay connected. Because I think, just like we're on camera today, I think body language is very important in conversations and communication. And having tools that allow us to do that are really helpful, whether it's the hiring process or just day-to-day business. So I think telework is something, and remote work is something that is going to stick around. And I think it's a good thing, and it does. It opens up the applicant pool. We have people right now supporting HRIT at DHS from California to Texas to Florida. So it really doesn't matter where they work. And it's allowing us access to the people with the right skills to support the technologies that we're putting in place. Because again, technology, like other functions, technology is always changing. That's the only constant in technology. So you've got to keep your skill sets and your employees getting upskilled, reskilled to keep current. Because if you don't, and you don't continue with the training, you're just going to fall behind. And so having access to a larger population to support us is absolutely necessary.
And Neil, I know that, for you all, hiring workers, frontline workers in some pretty remote areas has been a challenge, Border Patrol, ICE, that kind of thing. And perhaps maybe remote work might give you opportunities to maybe hire spouses, family members, et cetera, who maybe wouldn't want to move to a remote location, or they struggle to find work in a remote location. But now with telework, that might give you some new opportunities there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, similar to the way the military works with the family members, and, they constantly have to move around, and they are in different, parts, not just of the country, but the world. And having the ability, I think it really opens us up globally rather than just across the country to access to talent and employees.
Byron, how are you thinking about remote work now that we've had this experience for the past year plus?
I think as leaders, we need to give our hiring managers and supervisors as much flexibility and tools to bring on talent as possible. And I think one of those tools is being able to allow employees the opportunity to work remotely. And so I want the best candidate. I don't care if they're in Florida, California, or Alaska. I want the best candidate that's going to be able to provide the mission enabling services that our organizations does for our customers. To Neil's point, a lot of our customers and the bureaus do need to be out in the field, but the work that we do at IBC is very much back office mission enabling work. And so what that means is that I can get the same level of performance from someone that works in our Denver campus as we get from our Washington, D.C. campus. And so I want to make sure that I'm arming my hiring managers with the maximum amount of flexibility and incentives to bring in the talent that they need, particularly in some of the hard to fill positions. And so we have over 200 1102 contracting officers. Everybody is jockeying for the same pool of skillful contracting officers and trained contracting officers across the country. And so if it means that we can keep a GS-14 contracting officer by allowing them to work remotely, I think it's worth it because the manpower and the cost that it takes to recruit and bring someone on board far outweighs and the time that it outweighs the cost of having someone working remote. And I think because of the pandemic, we found interesting and innovative ways to engage with our employees using Microsoft Teams, Zoom, having opportunities and being more engaging with town halls. I think leaders have been more creative about doing that to make sure that we are replicating as much as possible being in the office. And so we've pivoted very well. And I think that's the direction that the entire government should be going towards for the 21st century.
So Tracy, let me bring you in here because GSA has been a proponent of telework for a while. Your experience with this. So how do you maybe use some of these technologies that we've been talking about for the past couple minutes here? How do you use that to provide that employee experience that Byron just mentioned? Maybe replicate the office experience if you're not seeing the employees day to day. If you're hiring somebody from across the country that's maybe not ever going to come into the office, how do you do that?
So I will say, I think one of the greatest revelations to me is it's starting to level the playing field, because now I'm consciously spending more time with my employees, whether they're in DC, which is where I happen to be based, or my managers that are spread across the 11 regions that GSA operates, because we're doing everything via Zoom or Google Chat or Microsoft Teams. So I think there's a lot to be said for the virtual environment because it's bringing people together and the communication is much more intentional and you feel like you're making a stronger effort, which is a good thing. One of the areas that we haven't touched on though, but it's something I'm fascinated by, is we might also become more intentional about the managers and the leaders we hire. I loved Byron's point. We're going to get serious about hiring the best talent no matter where they live. The same needs to be said for our supervisors and our executive leadership. There has still been a continued focus on technical acumen, but the people that have been most successful the last 13 months are those with a strong degree of emotional intelligence that know how to lead people and to manage performance, whether people are in the building or are virtual, and who are just good leaders. And as we make this transition, we're going to have to really focus on that skill set because it's a great opportunity to finally focus on strong leadership in the federal government instead of business acumen. And I think that we are just set up for perfect success if we can capitalize on it and shed some of our old ways of thinking. One last point I think that's also important, and Byron touched on it as well, is about retention, because I've heard Wayne mention several times about the aging federal workforce. I would love to be able to retain some of my employees that are inching towards retirement, but maybe wanting to relocate to a warmer climate or to be closer to their family and friends in a different part of the country. If I can give them the flexibility to continue working a little bit longer while also doing knowledge transfer to more junior staff who are going to come up the ranks, to me, it's a win-win. Instead of people running for the door for the next phase of life, we're letting them take these opportunities and embrace them so we still have a skilled workforce in place and we continue to grow our new employees that are coming in at entry-level jobs.
Tanisha, let me bring you in here because I saw a couple more head nods and smiles from you, especially when Tracy mentioned the leadership acumen piece. How has that come into play for you all, especially as you might have more people working remotely than maybe you did before?
So it's really interesting that you would bring that up, Tracy. We are so focused on emotional intelligence in our organization. It is so key to us. And so recently, we've really focused on upskilling our leadership, supervisory, and management skills. And a key proponent of that is emotional intelligence assessments and actually doing a lot of coaching with our leaders because, as you all know, travel, transportation, aviation, no one's traveling right now. And that's been a challenge for us. And of course, it causes stress for our employees. And so we've built into all of our learning programs components of emotional intelligence, ensuring that they're aware of their emotions and their employees' emotions and how it impacts the business and how it impacts our interactions with our employees and customers. So it's really important to us that we incorporate that in our learning. And most recently, we purchased Workday Learning Solution. And we're integrating that Workday Learning Solution into everything that we do. So if we notice that there's someone who's recently moved to a telework opportunity with supervisory experience or requirements in that job, we're pushing that emotional intelligence, the supervisory training programs that they need to be successful in those roles, because it's really hard to make that transition. And it's even harder to make that transition while teleworking. So we're working really closely with our organization development team to implement Workday Learning and to connect all of the dots across hiring, promotion, changing in jobs to that learning experience and incorporating emotional intelligence in that process, because teleworking takes away that emotion. You don't get to see their face. You don't get to interact or feel their, the emotion that the employee is experiencing. So there's some things that we have to do to make sure that we're aware of how our employees are feeling. Because some of this, with the separation of people and the inability to meet together, there comes some kind of change in your mental state for some employees. And we're very much attuned to that.
Wayne, let me bring you in here. How are you all, even as a company, thinking about this virtual world that we're in, and how are you, working with employees, perhaps training them, reskilling them, maybe? How have you used this time to engage with them virtually?
I just so much great content here. Just amazing to hear just all the different perspectives. So, and let me just say this to my colleagues here, that are on the panel. I think we sometimes fail to recognize that the U.S. government is probably the most complex enterprise out there. Workday sells to all of the verticals in private industry, but when you look at the federal government, all those same industries exist within the federal space, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's healthcare in the federal space. We do healthcare. We run hospitals at VA and all the DoD medical centers, as well as some other agencies. There's retail operations and and retail stores and commissaries and Costco-like, Walmart-like operations in DoD. There's Treasury, financial services at Treasury, insurance-like functionality at like Social Security. So you start to go through it. There's hospitality, national parks, which part of the Department of Interior, where Byron is, they have a hospitality function. So we can go on and on about what takes place here. So as we see this, and I've just been at Workday since the end of January, and one of the things that drew me to Workday is kind of their approach to all this. And what Workday had done is they started in the private sector first, and then they started in higher education, moved to state and local government, and then ultimately into the federal government spaces, which they're doing now. And it's a recognition of the complexity of the markets that they enter in terms of understanding what we need to be skilled in before we enter that market. We talked about using retirees to help us. Well, in a Workday system, you can track your retirees and where they are today if you decide to do that. So you can kind of, because you don't want to use that long-standing intelligence and skill level that you may have with all your retirees. So we give you the ability to hold on to that, to your retirees and the information about those retirees and how you can sort of leverage those folks going forward. The last few years, Workday established what they call a VIBE index. So value, inclusion, belonging, equity. And we allow you, based on the folks in your organization, to create a vibe index or vibe score to see how well you're representing what you do as an organization and how well you represent that as a part of all those customers, constituents that you interact with. So there's so many things going on, and the demands we're seeing today out of the human capital management systems are far greater. I heard all the panelists say this today. There's so many greater demands in the human capital management systems today than ever existed before, and just an opportunity to just revolutionize what we're doing in support of human capital management in this next generation workforce.
Yeah, Wayne, I think that's a great point to end on, actually, and all of you have touched on this. The moment that we're in now, I think, has really shown just how much emphasis and how important people are to all of these missions and what all of these agencies do. And of course, you need resources and thought and time and attention behind all of that. I think we could talk about this quite a bit longer, but unfortunately we do have to wrap up. I'd like to thank today's guests, Neil Singh, the Acting Executive Director for Human Capital Business Solutions at the Department of Homeland Security, Byron Atkins, the Director of the Interior Business Center, Tracy DiMartini, the Chief Human Capital Officer at the General Services Administration, Tanisha Lewis, the HCM Performance and Business Readiness Manager for the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and Wayne Bobby, the Vice President for the U.S. Federal Government at Workday. I'm your moderator, Nicola Grisco, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Workday.